everyone once again. Thank you for joining. My name is Davina Gounden, and I'm one of the communications advisors here at RPRA, and I'll also be your moderator for today's session. Welcome to RPRA's webinar on our draft lighting supply data verification procedure. And today's webinar, we will be answering some of your questions, and we'll also be giving a proposed overview of the procedure. And you'll also have the opportunity to provide feedback to some of our questions. So if you would like to ask a question, click on the Q&A tab and type it in and then click send. There is an upvote or a like feature where you can like another person's question. So if you see a question and you really would like it answered, please utilize that feature. And what it does is it just prompts the question to move up higher in the queue, and then we can answer it sooner. Please note that we do have Jen Pribble on our side, and she's going to be joining us as our lighting subject matter expert who may be answering some of your questions through this Q&A feature. You will see that in the presentation, we have a few dedicated slides where we will stop to answer your question. So if you notice that you've asked a question and it hasn't been answered yet, it may be because it makes sense to ask it at a later section in the presentation. If we can't get to your question today, or if it's very specific to your situation, please email us at consultations@rpra.ca. To note, this webinar will be recorded and we'll be posting it to our website along with this presentation later this week. We'll also be emailing attendees these materials, so if you miss anything or you want to revisit the materials, it will be available. I'll just note that when you're asking any questions, to please use respectful language. RPRA is committed to maintaining a professional and respectful work environment, and we prioritize the safety and well-being of all our employees. Harassment or disrespectful behavior of any kind by any individual towards our employees will not be tolerated. All right, so to kick off the session, I'm going to hand it over to Ellen White, who will introduce the rest of the team and get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Davina, and thank you to all of you for joining us this morning. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Ellen White. I'm the Manager of Compliance and Strategy here at RPRA, and I'm joined by, as Davina mentioned, Jen Pribble, who's our Senior Compliance Officer, who will be available to respond in writing to any questions that, while may not be directly related to this consultation, may be a program specific question that comes up for you. So she'll be able to help you with that. I'm also joined by Ankit and Jahan, who are our audit and risk officers. I'm going to go through some of the agenda topics with you before I hand it over to Jahan, who will take us through the bulk of the presentation around the procedure. Next slide, please. So before we get into the procedure itself, just wanted to give a little background about who RPRA is. Hopefully you know who we are, but we are a regulatory body that was created by the Government of Ontario to oversee two acts, the Resource Recovery and Circular Economy Act and the Waste Diversion Transition Act. So the Waste Diversion Transition Act, this is one that we're almost done enforcing. This act outlines all the transition from previous stewardship programs for resource recovery into the new producer responsibility model. So the last remaining legacy program is the Blue Box program, which is currently in its transition until 2026. So very exciting that we're able to transition programs for tires, for electronics, for batteries, and for municipal hazardous waste. Under the Resource Recovery and Circular Economy Act, what we do is we oversee the producer responsibility programs, such as lighting. Under this framework, producers of lighting are individually accountable and financially responsible to make sure that all of the material they're supplying into Ontario is properly managed and recovered at the end of its life. Yeah, next slide, please. So our mandate, as mentioned, we do have to ensure that the existing legacy waste diversion programs are wound up, as well as ensuring that the industry funding organizations that operated those programs are also wound up responsibly. We operate an electronic registry Hopefully all of you are registered under our lighting program or whatever relevant programs you're obligated for. Our registry is the key tool that we use to gather all of the required data that our registrants have to report to us, to establish and monitor targets that producers and other service providers have to meet. And it's also our main tool to enforce compliance with those requirements. We do undertake compliance and enforcement action when needed. We do take a progressive approach where we start with education. We're here today to educate you about your requirements around the verification of the supply data that you provide to us, as an example. And then we do have progressive tools that we can use if needed, up into including administrative penalties and prosecution if it comes to that. So far it hasn't. We do provide information to the minister, and as I'll describe on the next slide, we don't set the policy and we don't create the regulations, but we do provide information to the government that helps them develop that policy and those regulations. And important to all of you is we provide information to the public about Ontario's progress in diverting waste and resource recovery. If you go to our website, you'll see we recently just launched a new page for all of you to learn about our progress towards waste diversion of electronics. And so if you go to our website, you'll see a link to that page where we take you through the metrics of where Ontario is in its diversion of electronics. Sometimes when describing what our role is, it is helpful to look at what we don't do. We are not a replacement for those legacy stewardship programs. So we do not arrange for the collection or recycling of end-of-life products. That would be done by producers are able to set up those collection systems themselves. Most of the time, they do choose to work with producer responsibility organizations. So those would be the companies that you can, as a producer, contract with to set up your collection network and ensure that your material is collected and managed and recovered, and that you're meeting your requirements that way. It is a competitive market for pros. You don't have to pick one company. You can choose to contract with any of the pros that are registered in our lighting program. As I mentioned, we don't determine policy or write regulations, but we do provide information to the government that may help them make those decisions. And we don't set, collect, or regulate environmental fees to cover the cost of collection and management systems. So if you see an electronic handling charge on a receipt that when you purchase lighting, that's not a fee that's imposed by RPRA. That may be a commercial decision that is set by the pro you're working with or the producer themselves. Next slide, please. Thanks. So on to the purpose of this consultation. We have developed this draft procedure to provide guidance for producers to follow when they're completing their required verification report, along with the submission of their supply data on lighting. 2024 will be the first time that lighting producers will be required to submit a verification report. The requirement to submit verification already exists in our other programs, including ITTAV, so that's our information technology, telecommunications, and audiovisual equipment, as well as batteries. And so as we go through, you'll see that this draft very closely follows the model that we developed for ITTAV and batteries. So in 2024 will be the first year that lighting producers have to submit such a report. And this verification activity is very important to us. By providing accurate data about lighting, you as a producer, you're supplying a key component of your producer obligation. And the verification procedure gives you guidelines for how to verify your data in a way that ensures consistency for us as we're reviewing that data. Hopefully it minimizes burden for you as you're compiling that report. And hopefully our hope when developing this procedure is that we're providing clear and straightforward instructions. And so as we go through, we would be looking for your feedback to make sure that we're fulfilling that goal to the best of our abilities. Having accurate verified data to us is really key. It makes sure that we have a clear and accurate picture of the amount of material being supplied in Ontario, which by extension allows us to set minimum management requirements for each producer to make sure that the producer is collecting and managing the required lighting based on the amount that they supplied into the market. So yeah, that's fine. Yeah, next slide. Our timeline for updating the procedure. So we've posted the procedure last week on the 7th, and you're welcome to provide feedback during the session and written feedback up to January 8th of 2024. We'll provide information about how you can provide that feedback later in the presentation. We are really hoping for a quick turnaround time. As soon as we receive the feedback, we are going to consider it and do our internal review before we finalize and post the procedure. We're aiming for January, February of next year.
Okay, thank you so much, Ellen. We'll pause here for any questions about RPRA's role, anything to do with the procedure, our guidelines. I'll give folks a couple of minutes to think about their question, type it in, and then we'll get going. Okay, not seeing any questions, so we'll continue on with the presentation. If you do have any questions, please feel free to add them into the chat. I see one. I love that when that happens. So I have a question here. Can you re-explain the role of a pro as it relates to this procedure?
Yes, I can. So this is not generally a report that pros complete. This would be done by the producer about their supply data. Pros are able to report on a producer's performance on their behalf, but producers are required to report supply on their own. So this is a report that would be done by the producer.
Thanks for that clarification, Ellen. We will continue on, but please continue to add your questions into the queue.
Yeah. So hi everyone, I'm Jahan. I'll be continuing with the presentation ahead. So before we dive deep into what the procedure is, we can just start with a little background as to why we need the supply data, what are the requirements, and what is the scope and application of the supply data that we are asking you for. So the first thing is this is something which is a requirement under the electrical and electronic equipment, which in short I'll refer to as EEE ahead. So under this regulation, the producers of both ITT-AV and or lighting, they're required to supply this, report this supply information of whatever obligated material that they are supplying into Ontario in a particular year, which helps to establish the management requirement for the next year. So it is really important that accurate information is supplied because that determines how much material has to be managed by the producers in the following year, and that leads to compliance. So again, like Ellen had mentioned earlier, we had consulted on these principles and methods that we used, and lighting procedure is in similar lines compared to the batteries, ITT-AV, and hazardous and special products supply data verification procedures for which we had consulted earlier. So in previous years, in 2022, batteries and ITT-AV, they started submitting their first supply data verification report to RPRA, and HSP started this year in 2023. So from next year onwards, it's the requirement of lighting producers to submit a verification report to confirm what supply data they're reporting to RPRA. And this should be done, they should get this verification done from a qualified person or a verifier. The details of that, who the verifier is and who the qualified person is, will be explained further in the presentation. Next slide, yeah. So like I said, we'll discuss the scope and application of this supply data verification procedure that we have. So the verification has to be done of the supply data. So which includes the weight of the lighting supplied in Ontario in 2022. And in case if the producer has claimed any management deduction, lighting suppliers or producers have the option of claiming some reduction if they have used any post-consumer recycled content in their products. So if that is done, you need to verify even that amount. Now, one important thing to note over here is, even though for the previous years, that is 2022 and 2023, you're not required to submit a verification report, but you are obligated to supply us accurate information, because inspectors can conduct inspection and ask for more details on the data that you have submitted earlier. But from 2024 onwards, we will require a verification report. Next slide, please. Now, so we understand that a lot of producers may not be tracking exactly how much units or weight has been supplied in Ontario specifically. So for that purposes, we have some methods which you can use to determine how much units or weight has been supplied in Ontario. For weight of lighting, you can of course use the actual weight, or you can use the calculated weight using the related weight conversion factors. In terms of number of units that you're supplying, you can again report us the number of actual units, or you can calculate the units using the percentage of Ontario's population using the most recent official census. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah. Yes. So like I mentioned, the verification has to be done by a qualified verifier. So over here, we are describing what an acceptable verifier is. There are two options. The verifier can be an internal employee or an independent third party. So an internal employee also has to have the designation that we will be listing in the next slide. So any person, even if they're employed by the organization, having the designations mentioned and is in good standing, can prepare the verification report, provided they should not be involved in preparing the supply data report itself. So the purpose is independent verification. That is why even someone who is in the organization can do it, provided just they should not be preparing the report itself. Or if someone in the organization, they do not have an internal employee with the designation listed, can hire independent third-party accounting firms, audit firms to conduct this verification on their behalf. Next slide, please. So this is the list of the acceptable verifiers. The CPA, AICPA, ACCA, or we can also consider non-CPA designations, which is Certified Internal Auditors, CPB, RPA. So yeah, these are the lists that we have identified. If you think that there is anyone else, any other designation that should be included here, we are happy to get your feedback on this.
Perfect. Thank you, Jahan. Yeah, so that's exactly one of the consultation questions that we have in this webinar. Are there any persons who should be added or removed from the list of acceptable verifiers? And if you could provide a little bit of context as to why you believe that. So I'll open it up. You can feel free to participate through our Q&A, but you can also send us an email with these questions, the answers to these questions at consultations@rpra.ca. There will be multiple questions throughout this webinar, so feel free to wait till the end, get all the questions, and then send us one email. But please feel free to also use the Q&A tab. I do see that there's already one question in the queue, and I'm going to hang on to it until we get to that section of the presentation. Hey, no feedback so far. That's okay. Oh, okay, here we go. Question. So this participant says that they are not familiar with all of the verifier designations, but they want to confirm that they are all Canadian specific. In other words, no US designations are included. Is that correct?
Jahan, I'm happy to answer it, but Jahan, I don't know if you wanted to jump in with an answer on this one.
Yeah, I can take it up. So the designations over here includes US as well. So if you see your US CPA can also be a verifier, or yes, US AICPA, because we understand that a lot of organizations are, because they're linked in North America, US and Canada, a lot of companies, they are registered in US and they may have their base set up there. So we understand that, and even CIA over here, Certified Internal Auditors, even this is a US based designation. So yeah, we are happy to have US designations as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Right, then we'll move on now to the combined procedure.
Yeah. So there are RPRA manages a lot of materials. Specifically, if we look at the EEE regulation, the ITTAV and lighting, they all form part of the same EE regulation. It's under that umbrella. So we understand that producers may be producing all of these materials to reduce their reporting burden, and because ITTAV and battery combined procedures are already in place, we have come up with this recommendation that all these suppliers, all the producers that supply more than one obligated material in Ontario, they can use combined verification procedures for lighting, ITTAV, and batteries. Because again, a lot of ITTAV may have batteries, they are all linked together. So that is why this is something that we have come up with. Of course, if you want, you can choose to issue separate verification reports as well, provided all the minimum requirements are met. But yeah, again, something to note over here is, even though we say that you can submit combined verification report, but the procedures have to be done separately for each materials. For example, if you are doing sampling testing, you have to do that for lighting separately and ITTAV separately. But what we are suggesting is you can combine all the findings and submit it in one report instead of submitting separate reports and getting it done from separate verifiers. Yeah. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'll start with giving a brief description of what our procedure consists of. Basically, our verification steps consists of 7 basic steps that we have. The first step, we start with inquiring about the business processes. It is important because we need to know how the business runs, what is the supplier chain, how the products flow into Ontario. So the first step, that is why it starts with inquiring about the business processes. Next is, because the supply data consists of, so yeah, again, Over here, if you see the first step, like I discussed, we need the verifier to get the understanding of the business. And that is why it's important to document the responses for all these questions in the verification report so that even we need to understand that, yeah. The marketing process, the supply chain, how they are coming up with the obligated brands, what is the method that they are using to arrive at the supply weight that they are reporting. Next step we have is we need to test the weight of the obligated products, because that is the number which is actually being reported to us. So for that, we feel that sampling is a good approach, because again, 100% population testing is a lot of burden on the verifier and on the producer itself. So there is a sampling testing to be done on that. Again, if actual weight is used, you just agree to the manufacturer's specification. And if calculated weight is used, the calculation has to be checked. And if any variances are there, you need to scrutinize all of that. Next slide, please. Next is the product units that are being reported. Again, here, like we mentioned, there are two methods. You can use the actual units, which has to be agreed to the sales record to validate that. And if the calculated units are used, we recalculate it and see if it is according to the population from the latest census. Then is the next step, which is the non-obligated products. Just to ensure that the weight that is being supplied and the obligated and non-obligated segregation is complete, we also need to test the non-obligated products. So using the list of the non-obligated products, the verifier needs to sample some of them and see if they are meeting the lighting definition or not. That is, they are correctly classified as non-obligated and something is not missed. The next step is we need to confirm the accuracy and completeness of the supply. For this, you can just sample 1 month's data instead of taking 100%. You can just sample 1 month's data and compare it to the raw sales report that the producer has. And again, if there are variances, those need to be scrutinized. Here again, I would like to mention that this is a minimum requirement, 1 month's data. If a producer is not maintaining it monthly and has a total report, like yearly report, what they can do is and if it's easier for them, the verifier can just tie the total report to the raw sales data report. So you can feel free to do that. But again, this is minimum that we are asking for. Then after that is the next step. If mostly these are system generated reports that is there. And a lot of times producers make, or someone who's preparing the report, they do manual adjustments to the report because they may take out some brands which they are not obligated for, or those are already they are already supplying the data to RPRA, or any other reason for adjustments. So those are manual adjustments that are being done to the system generated report. So we need to know if any such manual adjustments have been done. Also, because these are manual adjustments, they are subject to higher risk. That is why we want to just assess that if these are reasonable or not. So the verifier needs to assess if these adjustments are correctly done. The next step is some of the producers, like I mentioned earlier, can claim deduction, management deduction, if they're using post-consumer recycled content in their product. So in that case, we also need to see if that number is correct, the deduction that is being claimed. So the verifier needs to look at that number and see if it is correct or not. And this verification can be done by third-party verification bodies like Underwriters Laboratories of Canada, Intertek, or any other third-party qualified body which is proposed by the producer. Next slide, please. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, lighting and ITT AV products, these are the two obligated materials under EEE regulation. So they can submit this as a combined report, or they can submit separate reports, but we are suggesting it to be a combined report because it reduces burden. Again, the materials have still to be verified separately within the report. So specifically, the report should contain the supply weight. The report, we need to know what was the final verified weight that is being reported to us. So the verification report must contain the supply weight before management reduction, any management reduction that has been done, the final verified supply weights, and any details of findings and explanation of the variances. Also, I would like to mention that the management reduction that is being claimed, that should be less than 50% of the total supply weight. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Jahan, for taking us through those steps. So here we're at another consultation question. So are there any additional options or steps that RPRA should consider? And if you could provide as much detail as possible in your answers to help us understand where you're coming from. And again, feel free to use the Q&A tab or to email us this answer to consultations@rpra.ca. And I'll just give folks a couple of minutes to gather their thoughts. Perfect, we have a question. So this question concerns the different reporting of weight and quantity. Since the quantity can be developed as a population percentage, can the quantity based on population then be used to calculate the weight?
Yeah, I can take that up. Of course, yes, you can use the quantity that you are calculating based on the population of Ontario. Using that, you can multiply it with the weight of the products that you have. Again, the weight can be actual weight of the products, or you can use the weight, you can calculate the weight using the weight conversion factors. Using those things, you can develop the final weight which is being reported to us. I hope that answers the question.
Perfect. And then we have some feedback here for the additional steps. It may be a good idea to require the verifier to provide details of findings and impact on the total supply weight reported for step 5, similar to some of the other steps. Thank you. We'll take that into consideration. Okay, just in the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving to the next part of the presentation on the proposed approach.
Yeah, so we are suggesting, or it's a requirement actually, that from next year on in 2024, we propose that all the lighting producers submit a one-time verification report in 2024. So because the lighting data which is being supplied to us earlier in the previous years, those have not been audited, or there's no verification report for those. That is the reason that we want a level playing field for all the producers. And in terms of accuracy and completeness of the supply report, we want that since 2024 is the first year that verification report will be submitted, each and every producer submits that. Again, using that data, it will lay a foundation that after that, like in the next year, 2025 onwards, we can create a producer categorization in terms of large, medium, or small, or just large and small, which will reduce the burden on the smaller producers to submit this report. Next slide, please. So, like I said, that using this data that we have in 2024, which is a verified data, we will use that data to create different categories of producers. We are proposing 2 different categories, which is large producers who will be required to submit a verification report and can be subject to inspection depending on how the report is and what are the findings. And all other producers are subject to inspection. So they can be randomly picked up by the inspectors and ask additional questions relating to their supply. So yeah, this is what we are this is what we are proposing for future years using the data that we get next year. Next slide, please.
Thank you again. So now we're at another section for more consultation questions. So the first question is, do you support the option to exempt small producers from the requirement to submit a verification report? If not, please explain why. And the other question is, what should RPRA consider when determining the verification process for large and small producers? So we did have a question earlier about if RPRA intended to exempt small lighting producers from the annual verification requirements 2020 from 2025 onwards. So I believe this will relate to your question here of, do you support the option? So we'll be looking for feedback from you all to determine if that would be the case. And I'll just give folks a couple more minutes. And thank you for your feedback. We'll definitely take it into consideration. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving on to the sampling methodology.
So we are using sampling as a tool so that the testing of 100% population can be eliminated. We understand some producers are small, but some are really large producers with thousands of transactions. So it's not possible to test 100% of population. So that is the reason that we have taken sampling as the approach, so that there is some accuracy and confidence in what is being reported, and also it reduces the burden on the producers. Here, we have taken 95% confidence level using this statistical sampling method, which involves using a random selection of samples and using probability theory to evaluate the sample result. Again, sampling is really important, because it helps to strike a right balance between what is being accurately reported and creating unnecessary burden. A large sample size will increase the likelihood of catching more reporting errors and lower the risk of non-compliance, lower the risk of inaccurate reporting, while a smaller size may reduce the level of effort, but then it can increase the risk of identifying exceptions and errors. That is why we have tried to create a balance using 95% confidence level, which we feel is appropriate in this scenario to get the right number of samples. So next slide, we'll have the sampling table over here. This is using the 95% confidence level that I mentioned earlier. So we feel that this is appropriate number of samples because we say that even if it's any number of transactions above 500, you just need to select 60 samples. So you can take a reference of this table. Next slide, please.
Okay, and then more consultation questions. So question number 5, do you support RPRA using a sampling methodology in the supply data verification procedure? And if not, please explain why so we can have some context. And question 6, do you agree with the sample sizes required based on the number of transactions to obtain a sufficient level of confidence and to ensure the integrity of supply data? And if not, again, please provide an explanation so we can understand your position and why you would want that. Again, I'll leave the Q&A open for a little bit. Think about the question and please provide your feedback. I'll also note that we can keep the Q&A open. If you have any other questions related to the procedure, anything we've covered so far, I'm happy to ask those questions and get our subject matter experts to answer them. So we have one question in the queue here. Is there any guidance on which month should be selected for step 5, besides the suggestion of selecting a different month in subsequent years? Let me pull up step 5 for you.
Again, over here, we have not specified any month. You can select randomly any month of your choice. It's just a random selection, so that there is no bias involved. So yeah, again, you can just select any random month and you can do your sample testing. And if the producer does not have monthly data, you can take the whole year's report and tie it to the raw sales report.
Perfect. Thank you, Jahan. Okay, so while folks are thinking about questions, I can also launch our poll. Oh. Thank you for bearing with me. So this is going to help us improve our consultations. So I have 4 questions. If you could please answer them. This feedback is really helpful to help us improve our consultations and help you get the best experience possible. So if you could take a few minutes to fill that out, I'd really appreciate it. I'll leave it open for a few more seconds so folks can finish up. And please continue to add your questions. We do have a little bit of time to answer some of them before we wrap up the session. Okay, thank you very much. And let's see. So we have one question here, or a couple of questions. So this is related to the different verification steps. And let me pull that up so we can have some context here. So it's related to step 1 first. And this attendee says that it appears to include confidential business information. Does the procedure include how this will be identified and protected? We'll start with the first question and then I'll get to the second one.
Yeah, I can handle this. We have separate procedures that cover our cybersecurity and confidentiality. So maybe if someone can go to our website and pull up our data and privacy procedure, we can pop the link in the chat for everyone. That covers how our PRA handles confidential business information. So obviously, we don't make public any confidential business information. And so that would be covered in that procedure versus the lighting procedure specifically.
Perfect. And then for the second question, when do we think the 2024 reports will be required to be submitted? So currently on our website, the deadline for supply reporting is, I believe, April 30th. And so we would be looking for feedback on that as well, of given this new requirement to submit a verification report, would that align with being able to meet that April 30th deadline was something that we are interested in getting your feedback on. Thank you. And we have another question about a follow-up question. Would RPRA consider aligning the date for 2024 lighting supply report to align with that of ITTAB? And so in general, these deadlines are within the regulations themselves.
So it's beyond our PRA to change those. However, we have in the past extended deadlines based on our release of procedures. And so it is something that we would consider, but as a rule, those dates are in the regulations and not for our PRA to amend.
Thanks for clarifying, Ellen. We do have a couple minutes left, so I'm gonna wait a few more minutes to see if anyone has any burning questions before we wrap up the session. We do have a couple more slides just to explain what the next steps are, what to expect, how to submit your feedback. But if you have any other questions, please feel free to add them to the Q&A tab right now. Okay, so this attendee is asking will the verification report be submitted at the same time as the supply report? And are these two different reports?
So yes, they will be submitted at the same time. What you'll see when you log into the registry, you're going to be submitting your supply data electronically through the registry portal itself. And then the verification report is an attachment, would be like a PDF document that you would attach to that submission. So it's done at the same time within the same process, but while you're entering your data, your supply data into the system, the verification portion is a separate document that you're uploading.
Thank you. That's a great question to clarify. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I'll go ahead to our next steps. And Ellen, I believe you will go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So again, thank you everyone for joining today and for the feedback you've already provided. We will take that into consideration as we're revising and finalizing the draft. If you have any more written feedback, we would love to hear it. Feel free to email us at consultations@rpra.ca. All of the information about this consultation, including the draft procedure and a recording of this presentation, will be on our consultation webpage. So when we share the deck, you'll be able to click that link that says website, or you can navigate to our homepage and on the top bar menu, there's a consultations tab, which will be another way to get to this page. We are accepting all of your feedback until January 8th, 2024. And so feel free to provide that feedback to us. And again, we're aiming for a really quick turnaround on this one, dependent on the amount of feedback we receive, but we are hoping to review and incorporate that feedback into the final draft next year by January or February, in advance of when supply reporting would open next year.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And apologies. Yes, that should say January 8th, 2024. Thank you all so much for joining us. We hope you have a great day and look forward to seeing you again. Thank you. Take care. Bye.